Good morning. My name is Ricardo de Castro. I'm a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Psychology at the Universidad Reformada in Colombia, along with my colleague Cristian Jimenez Romero, which is a PhD researcher in complexity sciences in the Faculty of Computing and Mathematics at the Open University in the UK. We are the developers of the following project. We are also very excited to have this opportunity to tell you about our investigation on the implementation of the method of peer assessment in the classroom and the influence it has on the reading comprehension of students. In the next 20 minutes, we are going to 1. Give you a brief introduction about what is peer assessment method. 2. Tell you about our motivation to investigate this subject. 3. Share with you the experiments we are currently performing. 4. Summarize our findings so far and describe further work. Let's start it. 1. Peer assessment. Probably most of the audience coming from an educational field are already familiar with the concept of peer assessment or peer marking. Even if you already know about this topic, we hope you can find some new information about peer assessment in this brief summary we present. Peer assessment or peer marking is a method in which assessment is done by students who are also part of the same evaluated population or who study the same subject to be evaluated. This is considered an innovative assessment method, McDowell and Moe, 1996, which has been demonstrated to improve the student learning process. There is extensive literature about peer assessment and the advantages that the implementation of this method brings in the classroom. Studies presented by Sadler Philip, M. and Eddy in 2006 show the following. Allowing students to assess the work of their peers help teachers and tutors to use their time more efficiently. Students obtain the results of their examinations much faster, and some metacognitive skills are influenced positively as the student learns to recognize the strengths and weaknesses in their learning process. In addition, studies by Soler, 1993, and Soler, Zaparlis, Fastow, Lubeski in 1997 have found that the process of peer assessment stimulates students to make use of higher-order thinking in order to judge the work of their peers. This leads us to identify the following mental processes that allow a student to evaluate an answer given by a cohort. 1. The student acting as assessor must have knowledge about the subject of the answer in order to evaluate it. If he or she does not have the necessary knowledge to perform an assessor, the student will be encouraged to find such information. 2. The student must interpret the question in order to understand what is the subject of the topic that has been asked, in which information is expected in the answer given by the assessed student. 3. Finally, the student will give a value to the answer of his or her cohort, taking into account the 2 points above. Because of this, we saw in the peer assessment method a potential tool to approach the following issue, which is our greatest motivation. In 2009, a study by the Organización para la Cooperación y Desarrollo Económico, OCDE, was performed in order to measure the performance in mathematics and reading comprehension skills in Colombian students. The PISA test was used for this purpose, giving an average score of reading comprehension of 413 points from 8,000 evaluated students. That's from Martinez R. in 2011. Even though the score was 5 points above the average of Latin American countries, that is 408, this was significantly low compared to the average 493 resulting from all the 65 country members of the OCDE. With 81 points below the general average, Colombia occupied a place of 52 out of 65 in the OCDE ranking. This study demonstrated that the students' population in Colombia and other Latin American countries have difficulties interpreting and understanding reading information, including text and charts. This deficit in reading comprehension is seen in high school graduates and persists even in higher education level. Studies by Calderon and Quijano in 2010 on students of first and second year of psychology and laws have shown that the assessed population was only able to reach a little level of comprehension, lacking the highest level of interpretative and applied comprehension. This indicates that textual information is memorized, but its true meaning is not understood. For this the need of possible alternative ways to improve the reading comprehension in students, especially in the Latin American area. We identified the peer assessment method as a potential way to improve reading comprehension skills in high school and higher education students. Why and how can peer assessment improve reading comprehension abilities? If you recall the process we mentioned before, which are involved in the execution of peer marking or peer assessment. 1. The student acting as assessor must have knowledge about the subject of the answer in order to evaluate it. If he or she does not have the necessary knowledge to perform as assessor, the student will be encouraged to find such information, as we said before. 2. The student must interpret the question to understand what is the subject or topic and what is being asked in order to see which information is expected in the answer given by the assessed student. And 3. Finally, the student will give a value to the answer of his or her cohort, taking into account the 2 points above. Now, if you compare this with the 3 criteria considered by the PISA's fundamental part of reading comprehension, which are number 1, obtaining information, number 2, interpretation, and number 3, reflection and evaluation, it clearly appears that these 3 processes match the PISA fundamental criteria. This reasoning led us to formulate the following question: to what extent does peer assessment affect the process of obtaining information, interpretation, and reflection and evaluation? In order to answer this question, we elaborated and performed the following experiment. 3. The experiment. Methodological design. Let's begin with the hypothesis. The peer marking improves the performance of reading comprehension in the student population in which this method is applied. Now, the independent variable is assessing the work of other students. This refers to the exam scripts from other students that will be assigned to each student for review and assessment. During the course of the experiment, all participants received almost the same amount of examination scripts for review. With the application of this variable, we intend to stimulate the cognitive skills involved in the process of peer assessment and test if there is a correlation with the process involved in reading comprehension. Now let's see the dependent variables. Number 1, PISA score of obtaining information. Between groups variable which quantitatively measures the student's performance on reading comprehension in terms of strategies used to obtain this information. 2. PISA scores for interpretation. Between group variable which quantitatively measures the student performance on reading comprehension in terms of interpretation of textual and visual information. Number 3. PISA score for reflection and evaluation. Between groups variable which quantitatively measures the student's performance on reading comprehension in terms of the skill to compare, contrast, and evaluate textual information. Now, carry out the experiment. In this study, the objective was to determine quantitatively to what extent does the implementation of peer assessment method improve reading comprehension abilities in the classroom. The target population was comprised of approximately 200 students between the ages of 15 and 16, corresponding to the senior high school level in Colombian education system. The population was distributed in 5 classrooms. 2 of them were randomly selected for the experimental group where peer assessment was implemented. The remaining 3 classrooms were taken as control group where the peer assessment was not applied. One, pre-test. The PISA test was applied at the beginning of the experiment to both control and experimental groups before starting with the implementation of the peer assessment itself. This in order to compare the performance of both control and experimental population before and after the manipulation of the independent variable. Application of peer assessment. Peer marking sessions. In this, the students answered to the exam questions that had 2 sheets of paper. In the first one, in that sheet, they have to write down their name and other information. The second one is where the question and answer is included. The preparation for each lesson include making 3 photocopies for the question-answer sheets for the previous lesson with handwriting codes on each identifying the student and 1 of the 3 selected peer markers for this student answer. Each copy was randomly distributed to another student in the experimental group. Once an exam has been peer-reviewed, the score is calculated based on the average score given by the 3 peer assessors. The application of peer assessment was done in Spanish linguistics lesson, corresponding to what is called English language in the UK, which includes elements of spelling, grammar, comprehension, forming shorter abstract of text, precise, and general concepts of literature. The students had 4 hours of linguistic classes per week. The first hour of the first day was used for teaching. The next day, half of the second hour was used for a student to complete new tests, and the half hour used to peer mark the answers from a previous session. On the third day, the hour was used for teaching, and the fourth day, on this fourth hour, we again use the same method for the second day, which means half class making an exam and the other half peer marking the previous tests. This in 7 weeks. It has been possible to perform 8 sessions of peer marking so far, and for a total of 560 marked exams, equivalent to 1,680 peer reviews. After 7 weeks applying peer assessment, we can perform a second reading comprehension test, but instead of PISA we applied a short test created by De Castro, which is less complex and significantly shorter than the PISA test, but measure the same variables than this one. This in order to observe whether the experimental group was showing better reading comprehension performance against the control group. The data reported in this conference correspond to the first 7 weeks of this experiment. In the first week, the process of answering questions and peer marking was explained to the student. The test college has a high reputation in the city, that means in Barranquilla, and its students are highly motivated with relatively good academic achievements, and the students all complied with the procedures and tried to give good peer results. Results: pre-experimental PISA test. Through the pre-test, it was possible to establish that there was no statistically significant difference in reading comprehension performance between the control and the experimental groups at the beginning of this study. Table 1 shows the results of the analysis of variance ANOVA between the two groups. Let's see this table. Obtaining information on the mean control, it got an 86 score. Meanwhile, the mean experimental got an 88. The interpretation 120 for the mean control, 123 for the mean experimental, and reflection 100 for the mean control and 92 for the mean experimental. These values in Table 1 show that both groups have nearly identical scores at all PISA levels, which represents a good starting point for our study, since at the end of the experiment it will be possible to compare the abilities of both groups starting from an homogeneous initial condition. Now, let's look at the performance of both groups after 7 weeks applying this peer assessment. After the first 7 weeks applying peer assessment, we did not observe any significant results based on the prime hypothesis of this study. It showed that both experimental and control groups did not show any significant improvement in their reading comprehension abilities. Let's take a look at this table. Obtaining information on the mean control got a score of 187 and the mean experimental 188. On the interpretation dimension, we see that the mean control got a score of 230 and the mean experimental 247. Meanwhile, the reflection shows that on the mean control we got at 133 points on the score, and on the mean experimental we see a score of 116. Now, as a matter of fact, this was something that we as the researcher group were expecting at this stage of the ongoing investigation. According to Adela De Castro, which is the designer of the second reading comprehension test that we applied, The length for the pre-experimental phase in which the partial results were obtained, that means 8 sessions and 2 months working on the metacognitive abilities through peer marking strategy, is not long enough to show significant and measurable changes on the reading skills. However, results so far provide some valuable information as follows. Number 1. There is a need to make the peer marking in a regular, solid way. This means that from now on, the evaluation process should be made within a frequency of 2 exams per week for 6 weeks more at least. Number 2. There should be a better training process in grading provided by the Spanish teacher to the students of the experimental group. Number 3. There should be more time for the students to peer mark so they can read and analyze their classmates without pressure. And number 4. In order to make this process stronger for further studies, it would be recommended that the peer marking should be applied not only in one subject, as in our experiment, but in every class the student. The results also showed that the students were improving in their marking skills. From the first graded exam to the last one, there is a visible trend for the students to grade more accurately. This is a very positive sign that the peer marking process is helping students to analyze written text more accurately. And following that tendency, it could make some difference in the final results once the experiment is finished, that according to our schedule, it should be over by middle August. By that time, we are looking forward to obtain meaningful results to share in the paper of this study. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for your attention.